Thank you.
Okay. So the next question is going to be, first, it will be 60 seconds, and it will be about zoning balancing. And Paige will be our first speaker. This is the question. Most candidates state their concerns for neighborhood protection. However, Seabright, Branciforte, and Central Park have double the density due to their RL zoning. What will you do to equalize zoning so all neighborhoods can be protected?
That's a pretty big question. Because I live in Seabright, I see it. I just shared a picture where literally one roof is cut to fix in the next door neighbor's roof. So I would hate to see that in any other neighborhood. We are just in Seabright. We are packed tight with all kinds of housing. And we have to start expanding elsewhere because we need housing. That's just the bottom line. We need to get it, whether it's on SoCal or Ocean or wherever at this point. We need housing so that we need to all have a say in it also, not just the city saying you're going to do it this way and that's the way it is. Because that's not, obviously doesn't work very well, especially in my neighborhood. I mean, I couldn't believe when I went looking. 3 houses are sharing like a roof line. But we need more affordable homes. We need more affordable apartments, condominiums, studios, whichever.
So I think that the distribution of housing throughout Santa Cruz needs to be in some way equitable. And if the east side has been taking on a lot of the increase in housing over the years, then we need to start focusing on some of the other areas in Santa Cruz that haven't taken on so much housing over the years. We've actually lost a fair amount of affordable housing and housing in general in Santa Cruz. For example, at 350 Ocean, so Ocean and Broadway going towards the levee, on the left side of the street, there's a line of about what used to be 40 to 50 units of affordable housing that have all been closed down and sat boarded up for a long period, for about 3 years now. And I think that that is one of the prime locations that the city should be focusing on if we're trying to put in more affordable housing, because it's a site where there once was affordable housing. The city owns it, and we can put in more affordable housing there. So we should focus on those types of areas in Santa Cruz before we start thinking about tearing down historic buildings and building housing in areas like the east side.
So I've been walking the east side and been doing house parties over here for the last 3 weeks, and there's clearly a sense that we've been trodden on over here, and we have to change that at City Hall. And going back to the area plan we talked about before, it really starts with the character plan. What's the character of the neighborhoods and the business districts here, and what is it we're trying to preserve and protect for the future to keep the area strong? And then we have to look at where housing can go, in particular affordable housing. And like has been said by others, I think that has to start downtown and in selected basic parcels that are elsewhere in the city. And the biggest place it needs to go, the university needs to start housing more of its own students and not stick them into our neighborhoods. Thank you.
So after looking at the zoning map and kind of just getting a feel of the different zoning categories that they have, as well as the distribution of it, it's very clear that there is a severe over-distribution of mid to high density housing in the east side area, especially in comparison to the west side area. And it was asked in the previous forum that we were at, do you believe that there needs to be equitable distribution of affordable housing and high to mid density housing throughout the community? I believe that there is a way that we can move forward with the city council and rezoning specific areas to make it so that we can redistribute mid to high density housing in different places, but also do it in a way that incorporates the community perspective so that it's not always going to be high-rise, stack and pack apartment buildings, but instead additional ADUs, additional multiple family homes, stuff like that, so that we can maintain that feeling of community and the neighborhoods that we love. And also, the city council has the ability to rezone whenever they want to. Something that really made me run for city council before was because they rezoned affordable housing locations on Broadway and built a hotel. So it can be done. They got their own.
I think we're at a moment in time in Santa Cruz that is probably something we, after the recession and other things, we're struggling as a community to figure out how to equitably distribute a very real housing need. Probably the likelihood of types of housing that we would prefer not being in our neighborhoods. And somehow we have to restart our community conversation around this. I think that as I travel around the city, west side, east side, Prospect Heights, wherever it may be, there's a recognition that we are in the middle of a decision point as a community. And looking back at the expectation of the number of units is, I think, something we need to do as a community, so we understand how much building we can do with our water supply and others. So I'm in favor of looking throughout the city to look at this zoning question and see what we can do in other neighborhoods and other districts of town to see if we can share this burden equitably.
One of the issues is that we're told that we're 97% built out. So when is it that we call it? When do we say we're built out? And how do we deal with that in terms of what I think is a really important issue for us to talk about, which is economic diversity. How do we not become an isolated, rich, white community? How do we keep a workforce in town? How do we make sure that housing is available for people in an affordable way? I think we need to learn lessons from communities that have been doing this for 20 years. Many of them in Southern California had to face this long before we have, like possibly in Santa Monica, for example. They really made a commitment with their city council that they would support and make a commitment to make sure that there was economic diversity. We can do that, and we need to do that, and then what it does is it actually helps us decide what kind of housing we will build, how much inclusionary zoning will be a part of that. In some of the places in Santa Monica, they have 50% inclusionary zoning.
Well, I'm glad this was mentioned before me because I didn't want to sound like the person to rain on everyone's parade, but when do we call it? When do we say we don't have room to build? With that said, though, I want to highlight a couple properties in Santa Cruz that have been sat stale for decades. One in particular decades, one not so long. But we could have housing there right now, but we don't. Why don't we? These would have been high-density units. Justin mentioned Ocean Street. 78 people were displaced and still displaced because of that property. And it is sat there collecting feces, collecting needles. Is that okay with anybody? Because I don't like that idea. It induces an area where we avoid. We need to look at our city, we need to look at the zoning, we need to expedite these types of projects where they make sense so people can live there.
Sorry, I can't see the end of the line, so I am absolutely willing to look at rezoning areas around the city to make it more equitable. But before I would be willing to change any zoning law, I would want to look at what type of impact it would have on building affordable units before I would consider that type of zoning. I think zoning is really a big deal, and we need to be thoughtful about it if that's the direction we want to go. But I also want to remind folks, and we have Measure H on the ballot, and I'm voting yes on it. I hope all of you are as well. But housing is not just the city of Santa Cruz's responsibility to provide when you look at the region as a whole, and when you look at traffic patterns. We actually haven't built a lot of housing in the city of Santa Cruz, but isn't it interesting that the traffic has gotten much, much worse? That's because they've been building more housing south of us. And so there are other ways to look at this. I think housing needs to be looked at regionally and needs to be reflected in our zoning laws.
All right. I'm going to go back to this question of getting the building doubled due to the RL zoning and the impact on Branciforte and other neighborhoods here. And my own experience as an attorney appearing before the Planning Commission and the Transportation Commission and the City Council is that there's too much deference given to staff who don't seem to get the need to work with the neighborhoods and to have them on board with whatever they're planning for their neighborhoods. And I don't see that across the board. I think we've got 3 very good council members who listen carefully, who believe in neighborhood integrity, and who are going to fight for that. But you need a 4th one, and it would be better if you had a 4th and a 5th one. And eventually had all of the council members who are going to support you and listen to you, because you're the ones that live here, and we don't need to be building things for people who don't live here and who are trying to make a profit off of some kind of construction project.
The next question is 60 seconds. It has to do with traffic and carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the number of people, other living organisms, or crops that a region can support without environmental degradation. In the 1970s, the city manager said our carrying capacity should be 55,000 residents. Yet today, we are at 65,000 residents and growing 60% faster than the average town in California. Neighborhoods are already frustrated by growing cut-through traffic and major corridor traffic. What are your ideas to combat these growing problems?
It's a great question. I think that the city, and I know that a lot of folks have been thinking about the rail and trail, the potential for us to have more forms of public transit. And I think that that is something that we really need to begin exploring more. As we continue to grow as a population, we need to think about how we can get more cars off the road and yet move more people at the same time. And that ties in part to another point that I would like to make, is that we need to try to keep our workforce as best possible in Santa Cruz. As it becomes less and less affordable, more of the people who work in Santa Cruz are forced to move further and further away from the place where they actually work. And as a result, we're seeing an increase in traffic. If we're able to have a community where we can keep the people who work in the community and provide them with more forms of transportation so that they get to and from their jobs, we can actually have an impact in the amount of cars that we see on the road. We have the Jump Bike program. We need to try to think about how we can get more people in buses and offer free bus passes to people who are commuting throughout our counties so that they get out of their cars. And we need to try to keep as many people working in Santa Cruz.
This is one of those huge questions for 60 seconds. So just following up, work-live units I think are part of the answer. You don't have a commute problem if you're just walking downstairs in your pajamas to go to work. But it's the notion of work-live units, which we've done on the west side. We need to look at some of those where appropriate on the east side as well, when it fits into the compatibility of the neighborhood. We also have to support all modes of alternative transportation, and that's where there's already a revolution happening. My family's only driven electric vehicles for the last 2 years, hybrids for the decade before that. We just got an electric bike. All of our family use cycling as much as possible, because that's what we have to do to encourage a reduction in traffic given the constraints, and it makes life easier. And the council has to embrace and lead on all of this by supporting bicycle lanes at all levels, from segregated bicycle lanes to improving that little concrete asphalt strip, the seam that exists on so many roads that's unsafe.
So if you remember to my opening statement of what my 3 issues were, it was responsible budget management, rent stabilization and affordable housing development, and transportation, because they all feed together. There needs to be a serious reset within the morals and values and focus that our city has. I work at the Resource Center for Nonviolence and train in the ideology of Dr. King, And one of the quotes I always turn to with him is that a budget is a moral document. And that is very clear to see where we can place our priorities and our values as a city when we look at the way that we spend our money and the way we prioritize things. So with regards to transportation, we need to get people out of their cars. The situation that we see downtown with the garage that's being built, that's so much money to incorporate more cars to get onto the road when we can be investing in alternate transportation systems, bolstering our metro system, making more frequent routes, partnering with people and other transportation agencies, but also doing it in a way that gets people that are currently in Santa Cruz to be able to stay in Santa Cruz because of rent stabilization. So much.
Well, I would venture to say that we're probably nearing, if not right up against our carrying capacity. And I think one of the main things is that our water supply obviously is the thing that ultimately will probably decide how many people will be able to live here in Santa Cruz. So I think that we're looking at a period of time ahead of us that we may be adding several hundred, maybe up to 400 or 500 new units of housing. But we haven't solved our water problem. We're looking at some major changes from climate change to some of our low-lying neighborhoods. So we're going to be looking at carrying capacity off and on a lot over the next 50 years because climate change is going to put us there. And so I think as a community we have some guidelines, we've passed some action plans, and we need to dust those off and start looking at those to really understand how we are going to not only prosper as a community, but grow in certain ways, but probably not too much longer.
Well, with the release this week of the UN climate plan and update, I'm just stunned how little impact it seems to have on any of the public leaders. The truth of it is, my grandsons will be 12 and 10 when the Earth may, as they say, fail. And I don't know if anyone really paid attention to what that meant, but it certainly hit me really hard. And so we have to take a look at everything that we're doing with new eyes. And if we're doing anything to add to our carbon footprint or doing anything to burn through our resources more quickly, we're going the wrong direction. And I think that what we need is a council that will have an understanding that Santa Cruz can be a leader, and the ways that we can be a leader is to make some decisions right now about what we're going to do with our transportation corridors, how we're not going to be building a highway, how we have to make traffic be more available to our workers that are being pushed further and further south. These are social justice issues, these are transit issues, and we have to come out together as a community and make a difference.
As you sit here, you may zone in and out, but I want you to pay close attention because you might be hearing people saying what you want to hear. High density, yay. But wait, we have a water problem. If I do nothing else, it's but try to be as transparent and practical and realistic as possible. We can be smart about the decisions we make for our future. But by being smart may mean making hard decisions that people aren't going to like. When we talk about being at 65,000 people right now, we also have a university that wants to add 10,000 by 2020 and another 20,000 after that. How are we going to house that many people? And our natural resources, if it doesn't rain, is going to be a really big problem. We currently do not collect our water runoff. Our fresh water runoff is not being collected. We rely on rainwater, and it is not enough to sustain everybody.
So, just to go back, it was about carrying capacity and traffic, right? Was the question about how we deal with traffic, or?
I'll repeat the question.
Thank you.
I know you know what carrying capacity is.
I do.
In the 1970s, the city manager said our carrying capacity should be 55,000 residents, yet today we're at 65,000 and growing 60% faster than the average town in California. Neighborhoods are already frustrated by growing cut-through traffic and major corridor traffic. What are your ideas to combat these growing problems?
Okay, great. Thank you for repeating the question. So in this scenario, there's no silver bullet. There's not one thing that we're going to do and it's going to suddenly magically make the problem go away. I think jump bikes were a great idea. Normally bikes in other towns like jump bikes are used 1 to 2 times a day. In Santa Cruz, they're used 5 to 6 times a day. So they're really being embraced here. So I think more of that type of transportation sharing action would be great. We need to make sure that city laws regarding home businesses don't impede the possibility of more people being able to work from home. And in fact, that's something that I've worked on as a council member, trying to see if the code that we currently have for today's business models and realities actually match up to what's needed. I think if more people work from home or work closer to home, we're going to have a lot less traffic and increase the availability of people being able to use jump bikes as a possibility to be able to live closer to work. And you know, one thing that is people just, oh, sorry, ah. I'm really giving you my answer. Sorry.
I believe that certainly on the east side, the capacity has been hit, and that one of the things that needs to be done here is look at changing the zoning so that you don't experience expanding until it breaks. There are other areas, even in the city, that could more reasonably accommodate growth if we have to have it. But I think they were right, that we're probably 10,000 over capacity. One of the silver bullet ways of doing it, I think, is to do what Davis did and get the university to say, you're going to house all your students. Because there's probably 10,000 of them that are taking up space down in the east side, lower east side, and west side, and different areas where they're impacting us in a very negative way. If we can get the university to absorb all of those, which they should do, they did it in Davis. There's no reason. Davis is less impacted than Santa Cruz is by those students coming in. So we can do that here as well.
So it sounds like we all have the same answers. We pretty much all think the same way. It's kind of amazing to me how we all are on the same page about a lot of stuff. But I, for one, say the university needs to take care of their own students. I have a lot of them in my neighborhood already, and I think it's only a 2-bedroom, and I think we have like 10 people in there. I'm not quite sure. But there's going to be a time where we can say no more. And, you know, we can build what we can build right now, try to take care of what's now, but we're going to have to come to a point where we're going to say no because we don't have all the extra services anymore. And we also need to start taking care of the public safety, because if we don't get this public safety stuff together, no one's going to want to be here anyways, because it's terrible, as you saw at Dave Lane. What a shame. So that's how I feel about it, along with all of my members here.
Thank you.